Hi everyone, my name is Christy Mason Cox and welcome to Lighthouse for Life and our very special presentation, The Truth of Trafficking, From Dark to Light. Over the last several months, we've been bringing you the real-life stories of victims of human trafficking in our community and all those who intersect with them. The series was a bit provocative and it generated quite a bit of buzz. So in honor of January being Human Trafficking Awareness Month, we wanted to bring together some of the key people in our series. We'll discuss some of the more profound things they said and what the fight against trafficking means moving forward. So here to talk about all of this is Heather Pounds. She was a victim herself, but I like to say about her now, she is a thriver. She's not just a survivor, she is a thriver, and she is a huge figure in the movement right now. Next to her is Assistant U.S. Attorney Elliot Daniels. We have child psychiatrist Dr. Tiona Praylow. Next to her is Todd Carnes, a former pastor and missionary and a real expert in the dangers of pornography. And of course, Jen Thompson, who is the CEO of Lighthouse for Life. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you. Heather, I want to start with you because you started off the series in August with us and you just got a lot of people talking about you and your incredible story. So 20 years about you spent in the life. You were a teenager. Your trafficker got you hooked on drugs. It was a tough life. I want you to listen to what you told us.
A lot of girls who are trafficked, or a lot of victims who are trafficked, are really trafficked by a family member or someone who they know. It's not a stranger. It's not someone who is outside of the family. Most of the time it's someone that's associated with the family or a family member. This particular individual knew me because he knew my sister. So he knew a lot of my vulnerabilities because of the things that my sister would share in her peer group. So whenever he met me, he knew what to prey on. We call them the Romeo pimp.
Heather, you're a mom now. You have a teenage daughter. What would you tell yourself? What would you tell that teenage girl, knowing what you know now?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said I have a teenage daughter, and I do get to tell myself the things that was never told to me by being able to tell my own child. And that is that you are valuable, you're worthy, you mean something, and you have a life that is worth living.
And you didn't know that back then?
No, I didn't. I believed, that there were things wrong with me, that I was a product of my environment. I had no self-esteem, no self-worth, didn't feel like I was valued or loved by my family. And so because of that, and because I didn't have people telling me what I really want to tell my own daughter often, I listened to the first person that did tell me.
Dr. Praylow, Heather's story is totally familiar to you. You've heard her story time and time again. In your practice, you deal with kids who've been really, really damaged, and you've seen just devastating cases of abuse. Take a look at what you told me.
It is heartbreaking to hear what people are capable of. So recently, I had a kid who talked about their parent being the person that participated in their victimization, and that their parent was partaking in those acts with other people's kids, but also subjecting them to it. And that kid talked about just the conditions, being chained to beds.
This is something I want to talk to a few of you about, but first of all, to unpack that, you told me that before you can even begin to talk to a kid who's been so damaged about their own hurt and their own anger, you have to check yourself. You have to deal with yourself. So how does that even work?
Yeah, and I think about this question a lot because I made the statement, how can people be capable of this? And really, when we look at the condition of the human heart, we are all participating in this on some level, whether or not we want to face that truth. But we are participating in a society that allows this to propagate, that supports the businesses that turn a blind eye to this, that refuses to be more vocal in public spaces, that is complacent about pushing for laws that insist and demand that we do more in bringing this to an end. When we hear about this and we decide that it's someone else's responsibility to fight the fight, when we get the information about how to help and we say, I'll come back to this another time as long as I can protect my kids, when we allow those little mental excuses to become the norm, we are participating in sex trafficking. And so I can't control what someone else is capable of or allows themselves to do to a child. But I can say, if I see something that I can do in the fight, then I must, or what I'm saying is I'm okay with it. And when I look at it that way, there is no preparation, because I feel like I'm making a choice to either participate in the devastation that's happening, or I'm making a choice to stand up and fight and say, not on my watch. Mm-hmm. And so that really helps to remove some of the anger or a little bit of self-righteousness about why would somebody do this? Well, why would someone not do something about it? I think,
Jen and Elliot in particular, you guys are both on the front lines, and Dr. Praylow mentioned law enforcement. And perhaps the biggest misconception that Heather and Dr. Praylow just blew up is the fact that we have this stranger danger and the movie Taken. And so I want to ask both of you, Jen, from your perspective as CEO of Lighthouse for Life, how often are you actually getting a call that my kid was at Columbiana Center and something happened?
Yeah, no, what I'm getting is people screenshotting those stories that are on social media where it's been shared thousands of times and asking me, how legit is this? And what I will not want to do is say, well, I can't speak to that scenario because I wasn't that person in that scenario. But if you want to ask me, how many times do I get messages from moms who say, I found this series of messages in my child's Snapchat. What does this emoji sentence mean? And, my kid is continually running away, and what can I do to, help change that? Or how many times am I sitting there listening to parents that are raging and angry at their child for running away as if it's the child's fault? And I need them to be on a team with that child. And so I have a lot of thoughts about that, but I don't get very many calls from, the abduction, white van, no windows type setting.
And Elliot, that's really why, from a law enforcement perspective, making human trafficking cases is pretty tough.
Sure.
I mean, it's just a really, really hard case to make. I want you to listen to this clip from another trafficked survivor we spoke to. Her story was just heartbreaking, and she is a survivor. She's doing well now, but her name is Ashley, and let's talk about it on the other side of this clip.
I had to do sexual acts with them. People they introduced me to, they would give me drugs in exchange for sexual acts. They would give me drugs and then make me do sexual acts. They would record me committing crimes sometimes and then hold that over my head. So if I didn't want to do something, I was made to do that. So it wasn't just coercion and extortion, it was blackmail.
So Heather can tell you so much goes into this awful life, and a lot of crimes are committed. And law enforcement has changed a lot about how they treat these victims. I want you to talk about that and also what law enforcement in general is doing to to kind of change the perception and to help victims and not sort of kind of check the box that we just lock someone up?
Sure. Well, everything Ashley just described is things that we've seen in our own cases: extortion, blackmail, overlays of drug addiction and dependency, manipulation of withdrawal symptoms. That's what we see in our cases. And to Jen's point, the internet has revolutionized everything in our society to include abuse, to include exploitation. So just like law enforcement uses technology to solve crimes, and we do, abusers also use technology to recruit, to entice, to solicit, to sell, to advertise, to find customers. And so technology has overlays over all of what we're talking about today. To your question, it's a challenging type of case to bring, because what you're asking survivors to do is to disclose and talk in front of a jury, in front of people they don't know, in front of their family members who they may have never disclosed to, or in front of their abusers who they may have had complicated and frankly romantic feelings towards, their darkest moments, stories of their abuse, of their exploitation. And some survivors and victims are not ready to disclose, and that's okay, and they never will be. But when you think about a case that's based on coercion, you can only tell that story from the survivor's perspective. So it's not coercion from an average person's perspective or the jury's perspective, it's from that survivor's perspective. And so we look at a survivor and says, we think we know what this case is, we've built this case, now we need you to come talk in public, frankly. I mean, these are all public hearings about your abuse, and that's a lot to ask. And so what agents do and officers that I work with do is they try to corroborate every thread of evidence in the case to take as much weight, as much burden off the survivor as they can. And so every fact that we want to prove up in court, we'll try to prove up with evidence independent of the survivor and victim's testimony. And so we'll track down electronic evidence, we'll track down money flows, we'll track down rentals, advertisements for sale, we'll track down communications, text messages, emails, phone calls, and you'd be amazed at how much people put in writing these days. And so sometimes it's a gift to prosecutors and agents what traffickers are willing to put in writing. But our job is to corroborate every thread of evidence that we can, independent of the survivor and victim's voice, so that when we look at the survivor, we don't say this is all going to depend on you. But really, that's a Herculean effort. I mean, you're asking agents to do a ton of work that's incredibly challenging. They're really challenging cases, but they're worth it. We're committed to it. I know the agents I work with are committed to it, so we'll continue to pursue them. But you're right, it's a difficult ask for law enforcement. It's an even more difficult ask for survivors.
Something that made an incredible impact on me when we spoke is you said that you sat around the table with a victim and you had all these officers in the room, and she looked at y'all and she said, okay, everyone turn to the person on the right and tell them that your most horrendous, most embarrassing secret. Go. Sure. And that put it into perspective for y'all about how hard it is to get up in court. Well, one thing that you have just been such a blessing to for victims is you had helped Heather in particular, when you were on the other side before you were a prosecutor, expunge her record. And Heather, what did that mean? You said during the interview that at the time you didn't think it was such a big deal, but when you actually had that, it gives me chills now that it was such a sense of freedom because the state wasn't defining you anymore.
Yeah, and it still does that same thing. It was one of those situations where, you, as a victim, you're underneath so many different labels because they're so, it's the drug addiction, it's the criminal record, it's nobody can trust you, and all of it has an underlying issue, and the underlying issue with me was trauma. It was the sexual exploitation. It was actually the trauma from childhood that led to the sexual exploitation as a teenager. And then it just continued to go on and on. And so when I met Elliot and he wanted to go through my record, I was like, I don't know if I really want to do this. Why do I need to do this? But even more so, it was like this thing, a weight. It was like just this huge weighted blanket that hovered over me, that whenever he brought and made the sense of what it was that took place in my life, there was a reason. It had a name. It was called sex trafficking. You had been trafficked, exploited. Someone took took advantage of you. And after working in different organizations for awareness and prevention of sex trafficking, I had heard things and things I thought, oh, I relate to that. Yes, that was me. Yes, yes. But it was at this time that it was like a deeper level of healing took place. And something happened on the inside of me that let me know that there was a cause and an effect. And it wasn't my fault.
That must be so gratifying. There's a few times in our professional lives when we really have that gratifying moment.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you that, all of this can be academic in nature, and we can talk about, things we're passionate about or things that we're involved in. And it really changes when you're sitting across a person, the table from somebody who says, I'm a survivor. Here's what happened to me. Here's where I've been. Here's where I'd like to go in life. How do I get there? And so you had someone like Heather who talks about this very personal, heavy weight, right? But there's also just practical barriers in life. When you want to go get a loan, when you want to go rent an apartment, when you want to volunteer at church or at a daycare, when you want to possess a firearm or when you want to vote, felony convictions and convictions of the type that many survivors are compelled to commit in the first place that follow survivors around close a lot of doors in life. I mean, employment opportunities, housing opportunities, it affects survivors and their kids. And so that weight that Heather talks about is not just personal, but it's very real. And it's there's just legal structures in place. And so, we learned a lot from Heather saying, this is what I want to do, and said, all right, we're along for the ride. If we had a small part on it, all the better. But we've really learned a lot from Heather watching her go through this process.
So good. I want to turn now our focus to kind of the root and cause and effect of human trafficking. And Todd Carnes, you have been studying this issue of pornography now for decades and sounding the alarm as a pastor. And Susan Norris runs a similar organization called Rescuing Hope in Atlanta. And she's done, like you, extensive work on this issue, and especially as it pertains to sex buyers and sellers. And so, like you, she is just emphatic that everything starts with pornography. So I want you to take a listen to what she had to say.
Now, traffickers that I have encountered, the victims are the widget that they're selling. They can't put humanity on them because then they have to come face to face with what they're doing. So they use terminology that is animalistic so that it dehumanizes them. The place that they live, the victims live, is called the stable. The group that a trafficker has is called the herd. And they are branded. And instead of a hot branding iron like you would use at a dude ranch to brand the cattle, it's a tattoo. It's a marking that says, I own you.
That's a pretty tough thing to hear.
Absolutely. But the idea of dehumanizing people so that you can manipulate them is a very, very old idea. It's the reason the Nazis, when they brought the Jews in, they took out their teeth, they shaved them, they put tattoos on them because they could not see them as humans. Because every human's made in the image of God and knows good well you cannot treat humans that way. And so when you determine in your mind that you're going to treat somebody as less than human, in your mind's eye, you have to dehumanize them. You have to put this kind of terminology on them. You have to demean them. You have to make them somewhat less than. We saw the same thing with slavery in the United States, that we could never call the Africans we imported fully human, because once you call them fully human, you can't dehumanize them, and you have to treat them with dignity. And so it's an old game, but it is happening, by legions in today's society as manipulators take young ladies that are vulnerable. I was just listening today that in the teen years, there's a psychological vulnerability that young ladies have that just opens them up to this type of manipulation. And then you pour in the media and you pour in pornography, then it's just a cesspool that's ripe for all types of damage. And we have to fight against that. By the way, we see that in the locker rooms of our football teams because there are terminology that they use for young ladies, things that I won't repeat right here, but that we're all aware of. And that is that same part of dehumanizing these young ladies because you can't treat them the way that they're being treated once you recognize their dignity. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of fighting this, not on the front lines, but fighting it in the realm of ideas is certainly something that we have to take on, because I think dehumanization takes place in every generation. This is our fight.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for you a second, because there's some feminists out there that would say, it's my freedom. I can take a song like WAP and it's liberating for females. And so what? There's pornography on everyone's phone. How can you make such a leap from that to human trafficking? And what would you say to that? Because you have Susan Norris who's saying that is the core. It starts there.
Yeah, to that I would say that there may be some people in ivory towers who are protected from the real vices and evil vices and manipulation of men who can take advantage of them easily, who might want to talk about those things and might want to take that stance. But the reality is ideas have consequences, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to connect the damage that's being done to young men's brains in their teenage years. As a matter of fact, it's just like the illegal drugs that we fight, that when young men, they take illegal drugs, they get hooked on opioids, it physiologically changes their brain, it affects their neural pathways, it causes some damage that's lasting there. And the same thing, pornography does the same thing, and pornography leads them to this place where the only form of arousal that they can muster is through things that are heinously perverse and things that are totally immoral. And when they run out of avenues for that, then they bleed right over into buying and selling of sex and prostitution and then some of the violence that goes on. And so it's a sad state of affairs in our society. And so just because somebody stands and espouses something does not mean that it's true. A lie is still a lie if everybody believes it, and the truth is true if nobody believes it. And so those are just lies, and they're easily undercut with the truth.
Dr. Praylow, the whole time you've been shaking your head. What are you saying?
I'm just listening to him talk about the changes that happen in the brain based on exposure, and those same changes are happening in the brains of the trafficked and the victimized. And so the work that I do, I'm facing years and years of someone being told that you're not a person, that you're not worth anything, that you don't matter, and now trying to integrate into a world that's expecting them to function as if they believe they matter. It takes a lot of repetition and holding them in that space of vulnerability and feeling like I can't take another step because it's too scary, and I don't believe that I'll ever feel like myself again. And that same repetition that happens to degrade is the same repetition that we have to do to uplift.
Heather, you wanted to weigh in.
Yeah, I'm so glad that I waited a few minutes because that was really good. There were two things I wanted to go back to was, when we were talking about the branding and the tattooing, it was recently my mom was at my house and a few other people were over there, and I have several tattoos, and there are a few of them that have been changed after I came out of the life. And my mom thought it was really funny to talk about, I remember when I saw Heather's first tattoo when she was 13, and I thought, what is that on the back of her back? And I don't, at first it was like, if I would have caught my 13, 14-year-old with a tattoo on her, I would have been beaten down every single door to find out who did it and why. And where she doesn't quite still understand all of that because, she's not dealt with the ramifications of life, even in her and my father's marriage, and then all the collateral damage after that. But I thought to myself that, where was the mother intuition or the mama bear that should have been there, and why wasn't it there? And it goes back to them talking about pornography. And I remember when I found my mom and dad's pornography collection underneath their bed. I was a little girl, maybe 5, and I remembered watching it, and it altered my perception of a woman and what a woman was to look like or be like. And as it opened up this behavior that I wanted to see more, as she was beautiful, maybe this is what women need to do in order to feel loved. And it warped my perception over all those years. So by the time I was 8 and my great uncle molested me, I thought that's what was supposed to happen. And in reality, it just was one trauma experience after another. And to go back with what Dr. Praylow said too, it's years and years and consistent. And I've been out the life for 13 years, and this past year has been the hardest year for me to reach for truth. Just after experiencing some personal things in my own life and the separation of my marriage, it brought me back to the place of not being worthy, but having enough foundation of and a rally team, people who love me and care for me that I could reach out to, that I know that I am, but it's not always easy. It's like the onion just appears all over again, and you never know when it's going to come back. Yeah. And it does. It's like, sometimes I ask myself, I'm going to have to deal with this for the rest of my life. And yes, I probably will, because that's what trauma does. It's not my fault, but it is my responsibility to continue to stay in a place of healing from this. And so as life throws all the ups and downs and all the twists and turns and line drives and curveballs, I have to figure out how to manage my life through that. And continue to self-talk my place of being worthy.
And I think you just gave the best reason why Lighthouse and all of y'all are so important, because it's such a journey. And I think that people on the outside, again, see Hollywood's version and think, oh, just get them out and they're fine. And you don't understand that it takes all of you to the attraction to get back in for a million reasons is so compelling and so strong. So thank you for that. Y'all, I just want to end by just talking about where we go next. And something I asked every single one of you when we did this series is, have we made a dent in this issue? What have we done? And I want you to take a look at quickly at what Attorney General Alan Wilson said. If you could go over there and just have a magic wand, and you could just have like one Mac Daddy thing that would change human trafficking as far as what the General Assembly could put in your toolbox, what would it be?
I'd have an entirely resource staffed human trafficking division within the Office of the Attorney General, with trained law enforcement investigators, prosecutors, program coordinators for raising public awareness, to investigating and prosecuting these cases, to going into schools. I mean, a comprehensive, robust program to really go out there and change the culture in our state when it comes to detecting human trafficking, educating on human trafficking, prosecuting on human trafficking.
So I'll go around the room. How can we best wage and win the fight against human trafficking?
I'll take the opportunity to speak from the faith-based perspective that Lighthouse for Life has that makes it unique. And to me, this all is a root of identity in the human heart. A trafficker might have been a bully on the elementary playground, and a purchaser might have been someone that was made fun of as a nerd that ate lunch in the library and had trouble making connections and spent time online. And a victim might have been someone who was just looking for love, pardon the cliche, in all the wrong places as a little girl, and didn't know what real love was. To me, this is all from a lack of true identity in being made in the image of God and made to find your identity in who He says you are. And we're all in a search for that. And so to me, the root cause of it all would be if each human had the opportunity to hear from their own lived experiences, tracing that root out to where did that identity go wrong, because a trafficker finds their identity in the money they make and the sphere of influence that they're in and the respect that they gain from their peers, albeit a misleading type of respect, or the affirmation that comes from a purchaser that's a temporary fix to a wound that they're chasing down, and a victim who is just wanting to be seen. And so from the unique seat of representing Lighthouse for Life in the faith-based perspective, I just say it's a identity. Who are we really?
Who are we really? What says you?
I think we have to think about this not in all or nothing terms. What does it really mean to win? We're fighting a war on drugs. We're fighting lots of wars. And so I know the human heart. I don't think we're going to eradicate it. This is what I think. As long as we don't quit, we win. Because if we quit, then lies proliferate with no resistance. And even if these things continue to move forward, much like in the sense of illegal drugs, as long as we resist, we win. Because one man in the truth is stronger than 1,000 in a lie. And so if we articulate the truth with a lot of grace, but with great strength, then the strength of our argument will always carry the day. And I was thinking, when you fight a war, you can't just fight the artillery and the machine guns on the front end. You have to get to its source. You have to do those battles and triage the people that are wounded, but you have to go to the source. And the source is our society, which has normalized the incredible sexualization of our girls, from our locker rooms to the pornographic industry to the pimps who work the streets. I'm sure when you prosecute, we don't prosecute drug users as much as we prosecute traffickers. We really have to prosecute the pimps. We really have to go after those who profit from this devastating industry. But more so, just as average people and as people of influence, we have to win the battle of ideas and protect our young ladies from the ideas that are currently proliferating. And we have to take back to the realm of shame things that are shameful. As a pastor, I know that there's a verse in the Bible that I often refer to, and God is rebuking his nation because he says, you don't even know how to blush anymore. My people have forgotten how to blush. And that's where we find ourselves in this hypersexualized society. And there are those who pretend that it's just individualized freedom and it doesn't cause real damage. And those are people who don't live in the real world. And so we can win if we never give up.
Amen.
As you were talking, I got this image of people just standing. Not fighting, not moving, just standing and saying, we won't move. This is not normal. And we're not going to say it's normal anymore. Right. And if we just did that, if we didn't give any more ground, that would be huge. What says you, Dr. Praylow?
I think from my perspective, children are where we focus the attention in making sure that the traumatized get an opportunity to heal, get an opportunity to know that that trauma doesn't define them, because that is a huge thing that makes kids vulnerable. And we talk about the young ladies, but there are also quite a few young men who are also being victimized and traumatized this way. So I think, focusing on, the children who not necessarily have been sex trafficked, but have just been traumatized, and making sure that we have resources for their healing is a very important and crucial step. And I think just refusing to be silent and refusing to be complicit, because our history has taught us that every atrocity that has happened in terms of large scale human degradation has proliferated because people were silent. And the moment that a few people said, I'm not going to be silent anymore, I'm not going to say it's not my fight, then people joined them, and those people were joined by other people, and they didn't obliterate whatever the problem was, but they stood united and kind of pushed back on what was pushing them. And so we just got to keep pushing back that darkness and pushing back that darkness, and that light will continue to swell and outshine that darkness.
And what you're saying too is so important, because you deal with kids and stopping trauma, because what you're really saying is breaking the cycle. And when you break the cycle, you maybe prevent someone who could turn into a trafficker or turn into a victim. So that's so important. What says you?
No, and the doctor's right. You know, when we reach sentencing in federal court, we get a lengthy report that details the defendant's entire life. Everything from their finances to their family to their employment, education, criminal history, at all. And you're right. I mean, these are cycles, right? This is modeled behavior that's repeated from one generation to the next. Now, not necessarily everybody, every trafficker has a father who's a trafficker, but there's certainly there's patterns and cycles that are repeated here. To your question, what do we need to win the fight? I would say it's an all hands on deck fight. So our office can be as aggressive as we want and punish and prosecute, and we will, as many traffickers as we can identify. However, if the service provision side is not there, then we will look at a survivor and say, this is where we want to go with this case. And the survivor does not have options to leave that life, to offboard from that life, whether it's employment, housing, familial issues with their children. What we find is it becomes difficult for the survivor to say, yes, this is what I want, when there's so few options for them to leave that life. And that's where folks like Lighthouse and Jen and Heather know much better than me. But that service provision side is huge. I mean, we're in a state of 5 million, and we have less than 25 beds for specialized bed space for survivors of trafficking. It's pretty wild. Yeah. And all along, what we've been talking about here, at least what I've been talking about, is the reactive side. So what you do when you identify a case, how you walk with a survivor from that life to the next place, how you punish a trafficker. But we haven't talked much about the prevention side. And I think that's probably the doctor's work more, and Jen's work, and they could, much brighter minds here could speak to that. But the prevention side is huge too. We don't want to just be a state that can respond to a trafficking issue, but also we want to be one that can protect children from ever entering into this life in the first place. So hopefully, all hands on deck, we can make it a more dangerous place for traffickers to operate, a safer place for survivors, and hopefully year by year, it leaves our state as a safer and a more free place.
Be nice to be number one in the state in the country for something like that, right?
Wouldn't it?
Right. Heather.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with prevention side. The first couple things I heard as everybody was sharing was, one is I'd rather spend time loving a child than a lifetime repairing an adult. And evil happens when good men stand by and do nothing. So we all have to do something, One of the things that I heard early on when I first met Jen was, if you see something, you must say something. It's better it's better to have said something and been wrong than not have said anything and would have been right. And so it is our business. It is our community. It is our children. It is our family. It is our children's friends. This is our world. And so it is our business. And if we have an intuition, if we suspect something, we need to say something, no matter what. And as far as myself, is I made a promise when the Lord drawed me out of that life 13 years ago almost, that I would use my voice and I would not be silent. And I'm going to continue to do that.
You have been a mighty voice, sister. Jen, I want to wrap up with you. It seems very appropriate to wrap up with you on this. Where do you want to see Lighthouse for Life in 5 years?
Oh man, I want to see us still shining. I resonate very thoroughly with the voices of my colleagues. And the thing that I see is Lighthouse for Life just continuing to shine light. Like Dr. Praylow said, when we do nothing, or how darkness is simply the absence of light. And so I want to see Lighthouse for Life continuing to shine, continuing to bring awareness, continuing to bring to an understanding of every vocation that you have a part to play in this. Oh, you're a realtor? It doesn't matter. Like, you see the community. You drive a bus? Well, then you drop off kids. You're a mom? Well, you're monitoring and raising up the next generation. There's a place for every person in this fight. And trafficking is a community-wide issue. Thus, it requires a community-wide response. And so I see Lighthouse for Life just continuing to engage the community and have each person be that voice of truth in their sphere of influence, just shining light. We are not the rescuer. We are the truth teller. And so we just want to continue to do that. And I just see this panel as a great demonstration of how the truth is bringing people together from various professions. And I see us just continuing to do that. And those spheres of influence will close out and those gaps will disappear.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for everything that each of you do. You're each amazing, and it's been a privilege to talk to you and get to know you. You've certainly educated me, without a doubt. And thank you all. And if you're watching tonight and you are in a vulnerable situation, you feel like you need help, please call the hotline scrolling at the bottom of your screen, or reach out to Lighthouse for Life online. We are here to help you. There is hope. Good night and God bless.